Today we're going to look at using a protractor. We use a protractor to find an angle. In our example, we just have one angle, and we can tell an angle because our two lines or our two rays meet together at a point. That point is called a vertex, and that's going to be important for our use of a protractor. So I'm going to use some color just because the protractor I'm using has a little plastic sheen to it and is sometimes difficult to see. So I'm going to put some color on it so that color pops through. The first thing I'm going to do is find my vertex. We just said that the vertex is where our two lines or our two rays meet. My vertex is here at the end. I'm just going to draw a dot to make that kind of pop through my protractor so I can see, and that way I also know where my protractor needs to sit. The next thing that I need to decide is which line am I going to make my base. My base is going to sit at the bottom of my protractor and point towards 0. I have two lines to choose from. I can make my base the first bottom line, or I could make my base the top line by turning my paper. Since my bottom line is already in a straight horizontal line, I'm going to use that one. And I'm just going to take a highlighter and highlight again so it just shows through the protractor really, really well. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the angle that I'm trying to measure, which is right in here. And I'm going to make the decision of what type of angle it is. Because it is less than 90 degrees, that is an acute angle. An acute angle is less than 90 degrees. The reason I take that step is so that when I am looking for my angle, I can double check my answer, because if it is an acute angle that I'm trying to measure, my answer needs to be less than 90. If I make a mistake with measuring my angle and it turns out more than 90, I know that I need to go back and check with the protractor again. So now at this point we're ready to measure. My protractor has a couple of different things that we need to look at. Right here in the middle is like an upside down T. This is where we are going to fit that upside down T right on the vertex. That's going to help us at our starting point. We have two rows of numbers, inside row and outside row. The determining factor on which set of numbers we focus on is going to be which direction our line goes. So if my baseline goes to the right and is pointing at 0 here, I am going to have to focus on my inside numbers. And that makes sense because it's going in sequential order, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. So I'm reading and gaining, increasing on my angle. However, if my line, my baseline is pointing the other direction, and it's pointing at this 0, I can't look at my inside numbers, or I'm starting at 180 and going backwards. So I'm going to start at my 0 and 10, 20, 30, 40, increase as we go. So my focus will now be on the outside numbers. So let's see how we measure the angle. We've already got it set up. Take my protractor. I'm making sure my 90 is the right way. I don't want to flip it over by mistake and look at the numbers backwards. So first let's make sure we got it on the right side. Remember, the upside down T is what we're going to put right on that vertex. So I'm going to line that up right at my vertex. Now notice I have a bottom line here on my protractor that points to 0. My baseline, the one that I highlighted, should also be pointing at 0. I do not have it lined up correctly yet. So I'm going to make sure that I keep my finger on my upside down T at the vertex, because that needs to stay still. And then I'm going to just adjust until I see that my highlighted line, my baseline, is running exactly over the bottom line of my protractor at 0. You want to make sure you don't just line it up with the very bottom of the plastic, because that's not pointing at 0. That would cause a gap and then cause my numbers to be off. So my line is pointing at 0. Then all I have to do is follow the numbers up in sequence and stop where I see my other line. My other line, if you can see, is running right up here. Again, since I'm looking at the 0 here and I want to go in order of sequence, I need to stay on the inside numbers. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, and I need to go to where my line is. My line stops at 60. So I'm going to write that my angle is 60 degrees. Now I'm going to do a double check. Before I even started, I named my angle. It's an acute angle. I know that an acute angle is less than 90. So I'm going to double check and make sure, is my answer less than 90? Yes, 60 is less than 90. So I have to be confident that that is truly my angle and the correct angle. If I would have focused on the wrong set of numbers, let's line it back up. If I would have looked at the 0, then looked at my line and my eyes automatically went to the outside of the protractor, my answer would have been 120 degrees. Hopefully, if you're using the strategy of naming your angle first, you can catch those mistakes. Because if my answer was 120, I should step back and think, wait a minute, an acute angle is less than 90. It cannot be 120 degrees. So I'm going to have to remeasure and find my error. Now this angle went off to the right, so we were looking at the protractor, the 0 on the right hand side. Some of our angles are going to go off to the other side. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put my vertex, make it appear a little bit darker. I'm going to choose a baseline. Again, since my line here is already horizontal, I'm going to keep that as my baseline. I'm going to decide what kind of angle I am measuring. I'm measuring right in here. Because that's more than 90, it's open like a book. That is an obtuse angle. An obtuse angle is greater than 90 degrees. So my answer should be greater than 90 degrees. Line up your protractor. This time, your baseline is going to be pointing the other direction. So this time, my baseline is pointing at this 0. Because it's pointing at this 0 and I want to go in sequential order of my numbers, I'm now going to be focused on the outside numbers, not the inside, or I'm going backwards. So I follow it around. I'm looking at my line way over here. Follow it to the outside. That's about 140 degrees. Not exactly on, it's a little slightly off, but it's almost 140. So I'm going to round that up to 140 degrees. The last one I'm going to show you is number 3. Same thing. I'm going to find my vertex, put a little period on there, a little bubble, but then I have to decide which line is going to be my base. Well, this one is a little bit different. The other two, I had an easy baseline because I had a horizontal line on both, and I could easily just move my protractor. But notice my protractor is not fitting anywhere nicely. If I try to put it on top, there's no angle. If I'm sideways, I'm not reading it as well. So I'm going to actually turn my paper whichever way. If you want your baseline to be here, you can turn your paper until it looks horizontal. If I want my other line to be my base, then I'll just turn my paper until the line looks horizontal. You can always move your paper to make measuring angles easier. So I'm going to use this as my baseline. I've turned my paper almost all the way around. Now I'm looking at that, and that looks like a right angle. And I know that a right angle is equal to 90 degrees. However, I have seen obtuse angles that look like right angles. I have seen acute angles that look like right angles because they are just slightly more or slightly less than 90. So I am going to need to measure just to make sure and verify that my eyes are not deceiving me, that that is truly a right angle. Again, take your protractor, put that upside down T on the vertex. Make sure your line is lined up. Mine is not, so I need to adjust. It is pointing at this 0. Oh, I have it all backwards. Look at that. The 90 is backwards. Oh, let's try that again. Turn it over. Now I've got everything lined up. It's pointing at 0, so it's pointing at the outside. Follow it up, and look, my other line runs straight up on that 90-degree angle. So we were right. This is a 90-degree angle. So it's exactly 90 degrees. You can easily practice these at home using your protractor. I would encourage you to use this step where you first decide what the angle is, just to do a double check to make sure, does my answer make sense?